Hello and welcome back to F1 Isn't Real. I am your host, brake check specialist Ben Wevel, and today Amesh and I are going to break down the 2024 Chinese Grand Prix, the first sprint weekend of the season. Amesh, it was a pretty riveting selection of weekend action. How you doing, bro?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm happy to say that this weekend was a great success in terms of entertainment for fans. It was action-packed, great sprint as well, and a great result for my home team, McLaren.
Yeah, McLaren. I mean, that's where I was going to start, really. That's where I was going to start off. I was going to start off with our predictions that we made last time out in the Grand Prix. McLaren being at the center, certainly, of my predictions. Um, and so let's start with sort of looking at your suggestion, Amish. You said Red Bull 1-2. Uh, it was a double Red Bull podium, as you suspected, but it was my call for a Lando podium that came true. He got the sprint pole, of course, going wide on the first lap, scuppering his race, which I'm sure disappointed yourself. But he managed to hold off Checo for P2, keeping him at about a 5 second gap for the whole of the latter half of the race. Amish, tell me, where did Lando's pace come from? He was just on the ball all weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant seeing Lando this high up this early on in the season. I'm glad that we don't have to wait halfway through the year to see his successes come through. Um, I'm not sure where they've come from in particular. I feel that McLaren have sort of just nailed the car setup this weekend, and their car in general is quite strong. Unfortunately, the setup success couldn't reciprocate with Oscar Piastri. I feel like despite damage, he still did have a few problems with the car. Um, but for Lando Norris, they definitely got it right, and the team have definitely done a good job over the winter break to deliver and produce a good car for the early parts of the season.
Was it perhaps some early upgrades that maybe played to McLaren's benefit this weekend? Because you're saying that sort of one of the first 2 week breaks of the season may have given McLaren some time to make some changes and just bring a car that can at least hold a Red Bull with its pace. I mean, that's pretty impressive. Do you think upgrades have probably happened then on maybe on the inside of the car?
I'm not sure whether anything has been announced. I remember on the last episode of the pod, we were looking at some upgrades, and I think we looked at Haas and Aston Martin, who were the two teams bringing upgrades. But as to the Chinese Grand Prix, I don't think McLaren did bring any upgrades through, which, if anything, is sort of a good thing because they managed to get a podium by having the same car as last weekend, just a different setup and a different track. And what I do know is that for the Miami Grand Prix, McLaren will be bringing upgrades to Lando Norris's car.
What do you think that'll do? Do you think that's going to put him in the fight again?
I think what that will do is it will just um, sort of lock in a sort of a good result. It will be more secure, if anything. I don't think it's ready to bring Lando up to the win yet, just because Red Bull is in a completely different league still. And at the rate things are going, you can't assume you have to be reasonable when you assume what the upgrades can do. You can't necessarily say that these upgrades will be magical and will get him the win unless like something crazy happens in the front. But I think that any upgrades are good upgrades, is a good thing for the team.
Is it just Lando taking the upgrades in Miami, or is it Oscar as well?
Um, I think I think it's both for Lando and Oscar. McLaren have published the first major package in Miami for both cars, I think.
Do you think it's as a response to the Red Bull? Do you think every car sort of needs to develop in line with this Red Bull? Or do you think have they gone in a sort of different direction and trying to take a different spin at these regulations and hopefully land in a similar spot to the cars who are currently dominating the field week in, week out.
Well, I mean, I think what the most successful strategy is consistent progress. Zach Brown said on Drive to Survive, the car that wins the first race of the season, if that doesn't change, it will come last in the last race of the season, which just goes to show how important upgrades are. And I think going forward into the Miami Grand Prix with McLaren bringing in these upgrades, it's definitely a good thing, and I think it's definitely a strong a strong point to look forward to for the team.
You were talking a bit earlier about Aston Martin having brought upgrades into China. I don't know if you remember back to last weekend, but I think it was for the United States Grand Prix, I want to say, where they brought in upgrades to their car and it just ruined all of the progress that they had managed to build up over the first half of the season. And really, from that point in the season, it started to go downhill. This weekend started out seeming to be more of the same in that situation. We saw Lance Stroll completely off it, off the pace the whole weekend. I don't think he spent a single second in the top 10, perhaps apart from during pit stop time. Um, and Fernando Alonso, I believe it was a mechanical DNF in the sprint, I think.
Um, I'm not sure about the sprint. The
A DNF in the
sprint.
sprint, I think it was a mechanical DNF. And so essentially what we saw was Aston Martin not particularly on the right track this weekend. But then, Fernando Alonso, obviously he can't hold on to his P3 from qualifying, but he manages to hold on to P5. But it was really the strategy that meant that he was unable to sort of maintain that position. Do you think that there's a concern in Aston Martin where even though they're sort of bringing in these upgrades that might put them ahead of some of the other midfield teams, they could really shoot themselves in the foot in certain circumstances and just leave Fernando Alonso with sort of a lack of faith, even though he's just been locked in for a new contract.
I think that's what they're starting to do already. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on the team already, and I think they've sort of found a bit of confidence by re-signing Alonso. I think from a team perspective, they might have been a bit worried to lose their number one driver. In terms of their future, what their future holds, I don't necessarily know what that will be. I think Aston Martin definitely needs to get their priorities right in terms of having consistency with their car and upgrades. It feels like that they're doing better this season than last in terms of the beginning, which is sort of improvement, which is what we like to see. But there's still that sort of lack of performance in other areas of the team where you can sort of tell by watching races and looking through the paddock that there is a of organization in certain departments. But yeah, I think pressure games on for Aston Martin in the future.
Do you think they might have taken their foot off the gas a bit, knowing that Fernando Alonso is sort of locked in for such a long time? There's less of an impetus for them to make, I guess, big decisions because they know that he's the long-term plan. And maybe they can dive. Maybe do you think they're going to divert some investment away from this year and perhaps into later years in order to maximize their chances of success because they know that they're going to have a successful driver in their midst for such a long time.
Well, I'm sure there's always incentives to do well, and I wouldn't say that there's a sort of slack. And I think if there was to be, like what you said for investments, I wouldn't say it would be at this stage of the year, unless it's going to be for the whole year completely. So
Mhm.
we saw that with Haas in 2021 with Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. And that was sort of a throwaway year, if you like to call it that. And I don't think Aston Martin is necessarily in the position to do that. They're not a backmarker team. They're still sort of fighting in the midfield. they were running in the podium at the beginning of the race weekend. So I mean, they don't really have much to win or much to lose at this point. But I don't think it's that the team is at the point where they need to sort of um take their foot off the pedals, like what you like to call it.
If you were to make a decision right now, or to have to make a decision about Lance Stroll, what would that decision be? Because as I mentioned earlier, I believe it was 15th in quali. I think it was 17th in sprint quali. I think it was 13th in the sprint race, and I think it was 15th in the race proper. Is there a concern around Lance Stroll within the team at the moment? Do they need to make a
Um,
change? And if so, where would that be?
I mean, hypothetically speaking, I feel for the greater good of Aston Martin, a change is necessary for their second seat. I think Lance Stroll isn't performing as much as the team would want him to be. But regardless of politics, I think that's what my view is. But in terms of what can actually happen, including in spite of everything that's going on, in spite of who their head who their principal is and who the owner of the team is, I don't think anything is going to happen for a long time unless Aston Martin completely goes under new management and new ownership because of what we all know um, with Lance Stroll and Lawrence Stroll. But I think for the greater good of Aston Martin, a change is required, not just in the car, but in the driver lineup as well.
What do you think it would take then to get Felipe Drugovich in that second Aston Martin seat?
Um, I think, like I said, a change in the management or a lot of money. Um,
And so
I
you don't
feel,
think that it's something that Lance Stroll himself could do? Do you think he is exempt from being displaced from that seat?
well, I mean, I think because of his poor performances in recent years, people have been expecting him to be replaced, yet he hasn't, and everyone is saying that because of his relationship with the team. So I feel that he sort of is exempt of not losing his seat. I
Mm.
think he is sort of locked in because of his status in the team, which is sort of limiting for other drivers who definitely can be showing potential like Drogovic, like you said. So I think it's going to take a lot. I don't know whether it's money or politics, but it will take a lot more than it would be for other drivers in other teams.
Let's shift the conversation now onto back onto the race and onto Ferrari and back onto our race predictions. We both thought that Ferrari were on for a podium with Carlos Sainz, the resurgent Carlos Sainz, coming back from his appendix surgery. But that wasn't really how it ended up being for the Scuderia. I thought that Leclerc's strategy could fail on him, but Ferrari were pretty decent tactically this weekend. Where do you think they're going to look to improve now to possibly bridge the gap that Lando Norris seems to have created? Um, or is this just a fluke uh, occurrence of McLaren being superior to Ferrari? And will it probably go back to normal in the race weekends to come?
I mean, in terms of Ferrari's performance this weekend, I feel that the car is what they lack the most. I don't know whether it's setup or the general performance of the Ferrari car, but what I did notice while watching the race was that Charles Leclerc was definitely um, was in good form during the race. He was pumping in fast lap times and he was cutting the gap between cars ahead, which is what the team wanted to see from him.
Mm.
I think he definitely outperformed the car for this weekend, and I think that their biggest flaw for the Chinese Grand Prix would definitely be their performance, not their strategy, but their setup.